Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Progressive American. Today, I have with me a good friend of the show and a writer who writes more than I do, PhiloShy. How are you doing today, Philo?
Doing pretty decent. Kind of tired, but what else is new, right? It's
Oh yeah,
PhilosoShy, by the way.
PhilosoShy. My bad.
Yeah,
Um, I always meant to ask you about that.
no
So
problem.
if you would like to introduce yourself, give you a bit of background, feel free to do so.
Yeah, we're PhilosoShy. We have like 5, 6 YouTube channels. We're a writer. We've done numerous research articles on the agrarian and power generation fields, most recently. And we have, political opinions. We are a person with opinions. That is what we are.
Well,
Uh,
and
so,
on
and
that
we're a
front,
historian. We're a
oh, very
historian
nice.
too. Yeah, that's
So
the
is it
thing.
like social, political? What type of historian are you?
Daily life in history
Oh,
is
very
our
nice.
is our primary thing. Is the wills of the people, how the people lived their everyday lives, how the people got things done in the past, and how the government interacted with the people in the past, and what terminology they used, and the wills of the people, things like that.
No, that I had something very similar in terms of like public history. I was specifically focused on political movements, but I only
Yeah,
have a bachelor's, so I'm still working on getting kind of balancing my political stuff with my
yeah, and
interest in history.
and in our case, our history focus is an even lower level than that. It was just like, how did Joe Schmo farmer live his average day? And how did, the Lord make him give his only begotten son to go to war for God
Yeah.
or what have you, and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of lay psychology in that, a lot of basic history, a lot of reenactment we did it as a kid too. So
Oh yeah, very
yeah,
nice.
we were kind of raised into that. We didn't really have a choice.
Yeah. So I guess that leads into kind of what I wanted to talk about starting off is how does somebody with like your diversity of interests and your experience kind of get into online commentary, and how has that kind of affected you, not only in your many channels but also in what you write and discuss?
Oh geez. What got us into the internet was becoming homeless. Because we were already kind of fiddling around with writing and stuff on Patreon at first, and then we became homeless, and then Tumblr collapsed, which is a different a different discussion all on its own. And so then gradually, we started building up a sphere on Tumblr or on Patreon, and then just doing writing articles and stuff like that. And then eventually we decided to branch out onto YouTube to do like video gaming because we like video games. So we thought, if we're going to play like 3 hours of video gaming every single day, we might as well chunk that up into like 6 half-an-hour episodes and put it on the YouTube. And gradually over time that became, we in being homeless, one of the few things that you can get a job at like relatively easily is a farmhand, because a farmhand is someone that actually can live on the property and stuff like that. So eventually we became a farmhand, and now we're a farmhand today. So we eventually got a farming channel and a politics channel and a music channel, and eventually it all just kind of rolled over together, all in an attempt to get a little bit more attention to pay the bills, if you will.
So in a way, your multitude of interests are not only like things that are some things you enjoy, but they're also an extension of your experience in providing for yourself and really growing as a person.
Yeah, and the way we like to think about it is, all of these things are things we're already doing, or we already like to do, or we already would like to do, and we're just getting it out there.
Well, and
So
and and like for me, at least in my experience, writing wasn't so much something that I did in terms of uh paying the bills to deal with something as extreme as homelessness, but I did use it to sort of pay some of my things through college. And initially, I didn't even really like writing until I got to college. Uh, it's an interesting
yeah,
experience because, for the most part, I've written about politics and history, whereas you
yeah.
seem to have a diversity of things that you write about that are almost a little more interpersonal to you.
We try, we try. Yeah. We've certainly run across a lot of things in being a professional writer over the last 5 years.
Yeah,
So
it's I will say I only started freshman year, So that was about 2017. So I've
Yeah.
been going at it for a bit, but I'm not sure I necessarily call myself professional or if I just call myself freelance. But with that, like, what made you want to get into politics, online politics specifically? Because I know you mentioned you were a farmhand and you wanted your channel to be an extension of that. But what about politics specifically inspired you to get involved?
We used to be a little uninterested in politics, and when we became homeless, it was a very political time, about 8 years ago or so, in what is 2014. And that was a very political time. We were coming toward the Trump era pretty fast. Things were getting very, very exciting in the political sphere. And so when we were doing that, people were starting to throw around, all of the really tight international stuff, and homelessness was becoming a major thing. And when we got onto the street, people treated us like garbage just because we were homeless. Our history didn't matter, anything like that. So we started really, we always had political opinions, but we started really getting into politics because things were heating up, and we were unwittingly, begrudgingly part of it already. Like, we were a homeless person, the political talks were there, and at the time in Portland, Mayor Charlie Hales was literally running tax sponsored and tax paid advertisements for the city of Portland, talking about how bad homeless people were and how they didn't care about Portland and how they weren't part of the city. And we're like, well, we were raised in Portland. That's not cool, man. So we started off having, concerns about the political sphere. When we became homeless, that's when we started getting public about it, because became part of it, because we became the target of somebody's political agendas. And so it kind of made us fight back and start to really band together with the rest of the roots of society, the impoverished, the disabled, so on and so forth, because we are mentally disabled, we are impoverished, and we are a member of the GSRM, and we experienced personally how it was bad for those demographics.
And I had again, like, not as an extreme example as yours, but I have found that in times, a lot of times, political inspiration comes from personal experience, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
For example, my attitude and really my first true experience with political organizing was based on disability politics, like the importance of benefits for disabled workers,
Hmm.
particularly when Raja Krishnamurthy was running for Congress in my area. He wasn't my congressman, but he was running for Congress, and he was running against Pete Ducani. And one of the things he emphasized was that they wanted to cut some of the benefits for disabled Illinoisans, and that was fundamentally antithetical to what I believe in, because I have
Yeah.
family members who are disabled who significantly would be harmed by those decisions. But I
Yeah.
also felt an intense respect for disability advocacy, because I myself have had experiences with, like, seizures and things like that.
Yeah.
And so having those accommodations was something that I think was worth fighting for. And it kind of expanded us uh, into my later work in college, when I worked for Disability Rights Iowa, talking about the importance of curbside voting for people who are physically disabled who couldn't, walk to the ballot box.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Um,
And
and
it's a
like
huge problem right now. People don't really understand that 1 in 6 Americans has a disability of some sort. And people trying to get rid of this, you'd be surprised how like half of the people trying to get rid of disability are on disability.
yeah, it's almost like there is a sort of hypocrisy when dealing with like a lot of the attitudes towards disability, uh whether it's, disability payments or disability accommodations and things like that. A lot of the people who tend to say, well, why do we have all these things? It's just making it we're how do I say this? We're just pillowing the problem for them, and then they don't ever push themselves or something like that. They pull somebody up by their bootstraps while they've got a disability. It seems to be that kind of attitude.
It's
Um,
funny too because they never actually offer any like sources to show that. as a disabled person, we actually entered disability with the statement in mind that we just need time and the cushion to get our own thing going. And here we are several years later. We still aren't fully self-sufficient, but we're slowly getting there, and this idea that the disabled people, will just take advantage of it all, that may be true for some edge cases, but by and large, the average person wants to work. They want to apply themselves to something.
Yeah, they want to make something of themselves because they want to follow their own dreams. Like nobody
Yeah,
wants to be like in the background forever. They want to be on their own terms. They want to decide their own fate.
yeah.
It's something that I think is unfortunately not discussed a lot, because a lot of times when disability is talked about, it's treated as sort of like an inspiration story, but never an issue of the person's value in their own right.
Well, disability on the whole, as like a political subject in America, is treated. It's one of the reasons that we are, so sympathetic to it. It's treated a lot like homelessness. Everybody acknowledges that people with disabilities, that sucks for them, but they don't acknowledge people with disabilities as having problems. They are the problem. Just like homeless people are not people with problems, they are the problem. Homelessness is the problem. The homeless are the problem. And we think if they were to open up their mind to the fact that these are fellow human beings that are just down on their luck, and they unfortunately were not born with the same opportunities or capabilities as some other people, we would be a lot more sympathetic to that.
Well, and that's the other thing. You have to deny the circumstances to justify the negligence. I do think to some extent it kind of intertwines with a certain attitude among some people that sees any sort of government intervention or government support as inappropriate. And in order to justify that opinion when it comes to dealing with disability, individuals have to like make up a lot of excuses or deny the severity of the situation for a lot of people.
Oh
It's
man,
it's a massive rhetorical tool.
that hits really close to home too, because we did not get any help from, like we get our check and everything like that, but at this point we haven't gotten any help from any services or anything like that. We gave up on that long ago because the government did not help us, because it is so difficult to get resources. That's one of the reasons that we so desperately branched out in all directions, because like, well, government isn't going to help us, we better do this ourselves. and
And it shouldn't be that way. Like
it should not.
if we really believe that, and maybe this is a bit of a lib take, but if we believe in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that should also include the ability of disabled people to get support so they can pursue all of those things.
Well, and going along that sort of thing, we don't think it's a lib take at all. We try to say that we're a moderate, not to pull like the enlightened centrist card or whatever, but we do try to be as moderate as possible, and we try to seek, personally, we try to seek gradualism. Big sweeping changes and stuff like that often cause more trouble, so take it one step at a time, go forward in life like that. But we have not been seeing in our homeless experience, we have not been seeing one step at a time in the right direction. We've been seeing one step at a time in the wrong direction, in the mode of hurting the lowest classes, the most desperate and vulnerable of society. For example, in the city of Portland, where we spent a majority of our homelessness, they went from having tons and tons of businesses like packing up their day old food and putting the in nice bags and stuff like that, and putting them out so the homeless could get somewhat fresh food, decent food that wasn't dirty and stuff like that. And during our homeless time, there were mandates and ordinances in the city of Portland that specifically required by law all dumpsters at restaurants to be locked at all hours when not in use, because it might hurt the homeless people to be digging out of the trash, and we don't want to hurt them. And we're over here like, oh, okay, or alternatively, you just don't want the homeless people to have food, because we see the amount of food that is thrown away, but they say that it's for our safety. and stuff like that. We see people treating the homeless, talking about like, oh, look how vulnerable they are, and then utilizing the homeless for poverty porn, or utilizing the homeless as a crutch to make their scenario look worse, so that they can come in as some kind of hero figure. And that's what the mayors of Portland keep doing, coming in as hero figures that'll save Portland from homelessness, and none of them ever do.
And it's one of those things where it's like they also add like anti-homeless infrastructure so that when they don't, they no
Hostile
longer.
architecture. Yeah, yeah, we've had to lay on some of that stuff. Well, Portland is actually just the worst for that too, because at some point they started installing benches where you can only lean on them, you can't sit on them, because they're all at a 45-degree angle.
Oof.
And the housey disability people in Portland, they did not like that. They were not a fan of that, because old granny here needs to sit somewhere, and and
Yeah, it's one of
and
those. Oh, go ahead.
well, and we don't think it's any mystery to anybody that all of this architecture, hostile architecture that hurts the impoverished and the homeless, also hurts the GSRM and also hurts the disabled. They all go together. Those are the three demographics that are hurt when your society starts to go the wrong way.
Yeah, and it's always the people who have the least that always get hit the hardest by the worst policies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to kind of spin off of that a little bit, I wanted to kind of get into how your experiences kind of motivated you in YouTube. Like, what have you taken from your experiences that you have kind of applied towards your political content?
Uh, we think there's a strong humanitarian, communitarian, as if that makes sense, sort of motivation now in our life. Like, so many people are making a big thing about the strong man sort of thing. Big great men need to step up and take care of our nation, and we need some hero to blah blah blah, this, that, and the other thing. Trump's going to save our nation, Putin's going to save Russia, Trudeau's going to save Canada. Realistically speaking, we've looked if you look at history, community endeavors are what make it. Humanitarian community endeavors are what make the biggest movements. We hear about kings and so on and so forth, but all of these kings and generals pale in comparison to the Protestant Reformation. Some rando educated dude slamming up a sign on the outside of a door, and then everybody seeing it and going, "Oh, that's a pretty good idea," and then everybody agreeing with them. And when we look at the great, inventors of history, the Nobel Prize winners and stuff like that. Sure, we used to have our great singular Nobel Prize people, but more and more every year it's coming out to be groups of people who make great discoveries. And so we don't see one single person winning the prize. We see one single person and their team of 27 people who all have their name also on the credits. So it's become more and more clear to us, as we've needed to rely on people, that the world is very much an interconnected system, and mutual humanity and mutual community is what's going to keep us all together. Not That's what's going to save our nation, what's going to get things. And in sticking with our underlying technocratic ideals, a good understanding of science and the use of technology to continue to update our society.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that at least in my studies of history, we saw that not just in terms of like science and general humanism, like you mentioned earlier, but we also saw that with the civil rights movement, with a lot of the mass boycotts and the establishment of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There wasn't a singular leader
No.
that really motivated that reaction to just like flood the jails and engage in mass civil disobedience all at once. It was very much a youth-oriented, sporadic statement of the masses
Yeah.
agreeing that the time is now.
Yeah.
And even after those particular protests were over, you had people like Ella Baker and Bob Moses who were still working together to kind of balance a variety of belief systems in a sort of cooperative manner.
Yeah.
Um, but I also know that you reached out to me. You wanted to also mention like how the international side of your politics.
Yes, absolutely.
And you kind of made a sort of comment about it earlier when you bring up like there's these big leaders that are kind of seen as the center of world politics, and unfortunately, Vladimir Putin seems to be occupying a lot of
Yes.
the media attention as of late. So I was wondering if I could get your general thoughts about not only Putin, but and Russia in general, but also how that kind of is playing out in Ukraine, and then we can go from there.
Well, we've been saying for many years now that we are living in an age wherein cult leaders or aspiring cult leaders are running first world or second world developing nations. We've got Putin, who runs his cult of personality in Russia, and anybody who has been to Russia before Putin and after Putin will tell you it's not everybody's Russia anymore. It's Putin's Russia. And Trump tried to do that with the nation. We've got Maduro. We've got, we allegedly hear Trudeau is not so hot himself, and Boris Johnson has clearly tried to. He honestly just feels like he literally just looks like the British Trump to us. We could be wrong about that, but the guy looks absolutely like him, just blonder.
Have you seen the John Oliver issue on him?
No, I have not.
There's an interesting suggestion by Oliver that points out that he will actually like reportedly mess up his own hair to look like a bumbling fool to kind of downplay his actual political goals in front of the press.
Well, and you know what, we haven't exactly seen that, but it would tie in to what we're saying, and that right now the world leaders, the important leaders, the powerful leaders that we're talking about right now are actors. They're not there, and we've also seen that especially with Putin and this Ukraine war thing going on. Putin has been breaking down. He is not the ice cold calculating actor that he was, who brings in dogs to dogs of varying ages and sizes to off balance his political opponents in interviews and press conferences and stuff like that anymore. Now he is chomping at the bit. He's going a little crazy with himself, and we think that this is ultimately what all cult leaders are trying to do, is what Putin is trying to do, and what cult leaders eventually do is break down, and that's what Putin is doing right now.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell because like I generally agree with what you're saying, but I also aware of the fact that in times of extreme conflict, consistent and accurate reporting is sometimes difficult, especially when it comes to like military casualties or how successful Putin is going to be in his
Yeah,
incursion into Ukraine. Um, but I know you and I have kind of gone back and forth a bit about particularly how online politics has reacted
yeah.
to what's going on in there, particularly certain so-called leftists who have defended Vladimir Putin or have given the false impression that he's actually denazifying the country. And I'm sure
Yeah,
you have thoughts on that.
there so it's interesting because we're not going to go into a lot of like examples or anything here. We're not going to go into specifics, but we were part of several subcultures in the past that where a lot of Russians are part of those cultures, so we know several people who are Russian who live in Russia, like still today right now, and so we get a degree of talking. And one of them, who we will not name, is he lives in Moscow, and he is sure, he believes every single thing that Trump says, or sorry, Trump, sorry, that Putin says. And it's amazing to talk to him because he's like, no, Putin would never be in Ukraine just to take land and authority. Putin would never do any of that. And we're like, but you yourself said during the pandemic that you might, because you're a doctor, that you might as well not report any of the COVID numbers because they'll just write whatever they want to make Putin and Russia look good. But and he'll say, oh, but that's everybody else. That's not Putin.
Ah,
That's not Putin. That's everybody else. That's definitely not him. Like, and we've actually had certain Russians get like extremely defensive of Putin just if we're because we're an American who said Putin's name once or whatever. At the same time, that's like only one of them. And so
yeah,
we know it's not the general thing. We know that the international media is covering this. And on the note of you saying earlier about it's difficult to get accurate reporting, you're absolutely right, for the record. But This is the first time Switzerland has stopped being neutral in forever. As we recall, it has opened sanctions on Russia.
It's pretty much the first time that they've done that.
Yeah,
Pretty
in
much to
America.
anybody.
Yeah, in America, because you're an American, in America we have this slang, this is Switzerland. That means this is a place of no conflict where everything is neutral and nobody
Yeah.
gets to bring up their beef. So the slang has been broken, and if the slang has been broken, we mean Russia, you're in the wrong.
Yeah.
You're
And,
not,
and
and we think it's hilarious that he keeps saying denazifying, because as we were trying to, sorry, we got off track. Our buddy is like, no, he's definitely getting rid of Nazis in Ukraine, and Ukraine is being led by Nazis, and we're over here like, but Zelensky's a Jew who swore his presidential oath on the Torah. Like, that's rough. That's difficult. That's a hard sell right there, buddy.
well, and it is also worth noting that Putin himself isn't really upset that there are Nazis in Ukraine. He's just mad that they're not on his payroll, because he himself has supported the Wagner Group, and
Oh,
through his disinformation campaigns, he has also supported the far right in the AfD in Germany. So it's a rather odd to hear this idea that Putin is suddenly very concerned about radicalization in Ukraine, which is to some extent a problem, but it is no more a justification for Putin to invade Ukraine because they have some Nazis as it would be for Canada to invade us because Charlottesville happened.
well, and if you look at Putin's history so far and Russia's history so far, this is not unexpected. He's already invaded what, 3 nations so far, took Crimea earlier, and it's almost timed at this point. You can like count when the years happen and stuff like that. So it was only a matter of time. And we think that's one of the ththings we kind of wanted to lead into is Putin is hitting all of the we believe we said it earlier, it's either competitive authoritarianism or it's fascist totalitarianism. Take your pick. We don't care what his goal is. It's the same path to both of them with a turn at the very end. And so in those kind of, governmental structures, the primary thing is to just start making people out to be the bad guy one after another until you have only you. And that's what Putin has been doing. He started within Russia with the GSRM. They don't, trans people don't exist, gay people are illegal, stuff like that. They're always the first ones to be thrown under the bus, just like in Germany before World War II. And then eventually you start making statements about people outside that were once you. That should be part of you, obviously, and because you're such a big man and such machismo and a great ancestral legacy, and we heard it all from Hitler, like word for word. Some of, as we told you before the thing, some of Putin's talking points are word for word the same as Hitler's talking points. You just replace Germany with Russia. You replace, the Anschluss with the Donbass and stuff like that. And that's how these authoritarian,
Oh, you cut off.
competitive authoritarian governments work. Announce something should be yours, then take it.
It's very, because like normally I shudder at like Hitler comparisons for obvious reasons, because every time you've been on anyone who's been on the internet knows that there is an inclination towards calling somebody Hitler.
Yeah,
But
we aren't trying to go full Godwin here, of
yeah,
course.
no, of course. But I do find it striking, at least in terms of the right-wing reaction of Hitler's of not Putin's politics, and how that theme of humiliation keeps coming up in Putin's speeches when he talks about the loss of the Eastern Bloc in the
Mm-hmm,
Soviet Union. It
mm-hmm.
is particularly disturbing, because that suggests it's not just Ukraine that he's interested in, although I would be reticent to say he would go into Poland or anything like that, because there are currently US troops there.
Right.
But it's disturbing because I initially didn't think he would invade either, and yet now I'm looking at the tone of what he's talking about, and I can't say for certain he won't go further if he wins in Ukraine.
Oh goodness, no, he absolutely will. The trend is definitive at this point. It's not a question. If he can successfully take Ukraine, he'll have a wearing off period, but then he'll announce that some other Slavic territory was once Russia or once the Soviet Union or something like that, just as Hitler said for all of the German speaking countries, and then he'll invade that one next. And the real threat we see from an international perspective, like personally, is that we live in the Pacific Northwest, and he has announced that Alaska is ancestral Russian territory. So we mean he's marked our nation on it, and we're amazed because nobody that we know in Alaska, because we did some work in Alaska, 10 years back or what have you, nobody that we know in Alaska is all like, oh no, it's no problem, Putin would never do that, he's not that kind of guy, he's a great guy, Trump thinks he's a great guy, and we're just like, yeah, but Trump is a horrible guy. But yeah, and as much as, again, we're not trying to go full Godwin here, but you can draw direct parallels.
Yeah.
First root out the weak. That's the trans people, the disabled people, the gays, allegedly. And while you do that, as Putin has, create an identity, a cultural identity of strength, of fitness, of rejecting feminine ideologies and enemy ideologies that might be regarded as un-Russian or un-German or whatever, and then over the course of time gradually cut out the rights of other people from other nations and target people us versus them with us versus them narratives. And then eventually once you have enough people under your grip, you can bring up some kind of extreme ideology to target. In this case, he's denazifying Ukraine, but fascism is almost always trying to target communism, for example. Just direct parallels here. And now we get into the point where, after entering the enemy territory, the competitive authoritarian dictator that is Putin is going along and bombing civilian structures and then using state propaganda to make it seem like all of the people who he killed or had killed were just crisis actors or whatever. Everything's fine here in Moscow. No, nothing to worry about. And for that matter, continuing to make the Ukrainians just defending themselves out to be, they're being aggressive towards us, we have to stay there. See, this is why we need Russia. And we think it's particularly, all of these governmental structures always revere some previous civilization. So, Hitler revered the Romans. He regarded the Third Reich as the successor to the Romans. Meanwhile, Putin has repeatedly stated that he thought that the fall of the USSR was the worst thing to happen in the 20th century, and that the world has been greatly damaged because of it, and how he is trying to remake the successor nation to the Russian Empire and the USSR. And we mean that's exactly the same. It's literally exactly the same.
It's one of those things where I try to isolate like the historical I try to connect the historical context, but then I also have to isolate the rhetoric and see like the point-to-point comparisons without committing an anachronism.
Right.
Because that's sometimes how like we get Godwins. But no,
Right.
it is frustrating too, because as much as there are like lefties, so-called lefties that defend Putin, it's also much more prevalent among at least the extreme right in the United States to valorize Putin because he's a Christian nationalist.
Oh yeah, the whole Christian nationalism thing too is a huge part of that downfall of your nation into autocracy and authoritarianism.
Which is
Um,
funny because multiple like Christian denominations consider Christian nationalism a heresy. And
right, right.
it's like it's so weird to see. Well, it's perhaps not weird. Perhaps it best be described as like a disturbing perversion. To see so many people see that as what many faith groups within Christianity consider a perversion or a heresy, being used as the gold standard among certain authoritarian right-wingers in the United States who may want to take control of the Republican Party in the future, perhaps even if they haven't already. Um, it's
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could like elaborate on your thoughts on that, because to me it seems like the inevitable result of this attitude of we are a Christian nation, and it's like an intersection of like uh, domestic politics and domestic prejudices mixing with international reaction.
So historically speaking, when you stifle science, when a nation stifles science and focuses on religion, it destroys the ability for the populace to question, because education is the immunization against extremism and ignorance and cults. So these, and realistically speaking, a lot of these, far right white nationalist Christian politicians are part of actual factual cults. They are part of little Christian sects that want the authoritarian aspects of the Bible to go through in America. Uh, and sorry, we trying to pick up where we were going there. Right. And one of the most concerning parts about that is that those cults have a vested interest in eliminating the education so that they can spill the word of God, so that they can try to say that the Bible is the only thing you'll ever need, because that makes, easy followers. And we think they're more than willing for their religious sectarian ideologies to get out in the public, to prostitute themselves to other religious authoritarian figures, even like Putin, even if they would not be okay sharing the same table for dinner. They're more than willing to sacrifice their own potential well-being just so that they can feel like they get the upper hand against, own the libs or what have you. They don't. We think the heavy Christian ideology doesn't think about the consequences of their actions in regards to them, because they think that they're just going to be saved for it.
So in a way, it's like they are excusing the consequence of their actions because they already see those actions as protected.
Well, why if Putin, we've actually heard many people say that Putin is on a mission given to him by God to take over. Like the 700 Club guy came out and he was like, Putin was given a mission by God to invade Ukraine, so eventually he can take back Israel for the Holy Land or whatever. And we're like, but that would not be good for you. but as long as they can say God ordained it, then it doesn't matter what the consequences are. God's going to take care of it in the end. I don't need to think about it.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things, at least, because I've described myself as Catholic and I remain Catholic,
Sure.
but I'm probably more of a heretic to some conservative Catholics, because I believe we could question everything.
Oh, well, that's definitely heretical. So.
A little bit, but no, in terms of like this attitude that God, or their right-wing conception of God, will take care of things. It seems antithetical to the entire point of being responsible for one's own actions, or collective's actions. Like the idea of being responsible for how your nation interacts with other nations and how it contributes to hurting other people through some of our more violent interventions, such as in Iraq. That kind of attitude seems to me to be almost, it's I'll just be blunt, it seems like a cop out to me, to avoid ever justifying or having a good reason for taking action or not taking action in the case of Vladimir Putin.
So, first of all, we want to agree with you. It is a big cop out. It's a total cop out. But you can't think of it from your perspective. You can't think of it from the logical perspective. These are people who are literally just doing it for the good of some deity figure, that they don't care who else gets hurt. All they care about is that God smiles upon them. And that's not saying that's what all Christians are, because you seem perfectly nice. But that is the standard of these cults, and that their God figure, that their holy figure, maintain things. For example, we know a lot of Zionists who just want all of the Jews to go back to Israel. They don't care what the Jews do once they're in Israel. They care that all of them are in Israel because Jesus won't return until all the Jews are in Israel.
And they don't care about the agency of the Jewish people that they want to
They
send back to Israel.
That has nothing to do with their desire. No, their desire is to get Jesus back, and as long as Jesus comes back, he'll take care of everything, so it won't matter what the Jews are doing or where they are or whatever, who cares? And it's the same way for the people who are like, no, Putin is justified in this. Well, you just want to get it over with. You don't care what the actual long-term consequences are because you believe there won't be any for you. And that's what we see. That's what we see with a lot of these movements, but especially with Putin. It's they want their goal taken care of by any means possible.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to kind of segue into how like Trump kind of plays into this,
Very
because
much, yeah.
he appealed to this aesthetic of like, we don't worship government, we worship God, but his understanding of what God is seems to reflect every bit of the worst prejudices of the far right, particularly when it comes to the use of law and order as a sort of way to make Putin look stronger, or to engage in some of the most cruel punishments possible at the border. And at least in his relationship, that aesthetic allowed him to like do some crazy things. Particular, he was saying things like NATO's obsolete, we pay too much. And looking back, I can't help but feel like it almost seems like he was perfectly inclined to make the United States and really the global community weaker, to the point where like it would fit well with Putin's invasion. But I don't
it
have any
serves.
definitive proof for that, mind you.
You don't need proof. It serves cult leaders and authoritarian dictators to weaken the world at large. Because then we fall somewhere closer to the psychology of strongman economics and strongman governmental dynamics. It's easier for those people who already have resources, the oligarchs, the billionaires like Trump, etc., to take control of a weakened populace. That's how cult leaders work too. You're never dragged into the cult because you're having a great life and stuff like that. You go into the cult because you're desperate, and the cult leader wants you desperate so that you come into the cult faster. And it's the same thing with these authoritarian regimes and Trump and Putin and all those people. They are doing things to weaken the world and to strengthen themselves universally in every single action, because that's how you take power. And we were very close. We were very close to a second Trump term, if not for COVID. COVID screwed him up. So we were close to seeing 4 more years of him eroding human rights and values to weaken the society and take more power for himself.
It's disturbing, like, and I know I've said this over and over again, but it is disturbing to see. Uh, uh, One of the commenters said, "Hooray for COVID." It is a bit disturbing to see that the saving grace, if you want to call it in the worst possible way, is something that has killed so many people. Like it
It's
took,
killed a million people. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
killed a million people
yeah.
to get the country to realize how incompetent and deceptive and manipulative and just horrible Trump was for the country, but
Oh, well,
also
now
for
you're
how
giving
he.
them too much credit because now you're giving way too much credit. The country has not figured out how incompetent and manipulative and shitty he is. There are still people that we know who believe that he is literally in the White House right now as we speak, and Biden is just a puppet, and actually Trump is still in control of everything. And yeah, and because once again, it's a cult. They don't believe in anything real.
Okay, so perhaps to rephrase it, to get the people who already thought he was terrible to actually mobilize to oppose him in
Yeah,
record numbers.
yeah.
Because like that's the thing now, like where I look at like the cult leader stuff, it seems to me we really don't have the means to like overtake people who are already in the cult, but we do have the means to make it to outnumber them by mobilizing people not just at the ballot box, but in protest and civil disobedience and things like that.
And
Uh,
general discussion, of course. When we talk about anything on our politics channel, for example, we're not there to change the minds of the cult worshippers and the far right, neo-fascists or anything like that. We're trying to change the minds of people on the fence. People who aren't sure if they want to go to that yet. They are still open to hearing input, And we feel like the most important thing there is just to be like, hey, take a listen to this, just hear us out.
Yeah, and that's like what I've tried to do, but a lot of times it's particularly difficult to get people to listen when they, like, for example, are convinced that progressives are the enemy, or that there's a bunch of postmodern neo-Marxists, as Jordan Peterson.
Oh, jeez. You invoked
Yeah,
his name.
I invoked his name. I invoked his name.
Invoked
Yeah.
his name. We can't stand Jordan Peterson, and our stepdad listens to his podcast constantly. We're so glad we're not like hanging out with them anymore.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things. But no, it does seem like that endeavor is a worthy one, but I also sometimes worry, like, the dehumanization of people who want to push that change, who want to reach out to those people, could make it harder for us to succeed. And so I was wondering, how have you kind of dealt with that dehumanization? How have you kind of convinced people who might otherwise be hesitant to listen to you, to give you a chance?
Oh, geez. That's. Have we done that? Let's one moment. Kind of caught us off guard there. We mean, first and foremost, it's always important to just come from a place of mutual humanity. So much when we get into politics, especially today's politics, we live in one of the most polarized times that we've ever lived in, and the people are going to want to call you out as wrong just because of the side you may or may not be on. So we think we've probably turned the most people to it just by calling people out on their fallacies. If our interlocutor is against us, it is like they've already made up their mind or whatever, and we're just hoping that we can pull some like people who are still on the fence in over there. We'll start calling out exactly how fallacious the general rhetoric of our interlocutor is. Can you not make a single statement without personally insulting your interlocutor? Can you answer the question, please? Can you
Mhm.
stop throwing a fit and making up schoolyard bully names for your interlocutor like a 4-year-old? Things like when people realize and have it really spelled out to them how destructive and toxic and abusive somebody is being, they will quickly turn away, because you can be the smartest guy in the world, but if you're an asshole, nobody wants to hang out with you or listen to a damn thing you say.
Yeah.
So most of the stuff that we feel has gotten us, like, you've seen us going off on regressives on Twitter and stuff like that a few times, we know, and most of the things that we've seen that has gotten us the most followers from our conflicts is when we just straight up call people out, like, well, what you said has absolutely nothing to do with the conversation we were having. Please attack our argument, not us personally. That is just you trying to make us sound like someone weak, but is actually extremely insulting to numerous other demographics that may or may not be watching. So,
Or had nothing to do with it whatsoever, and are
oh
not
yeah,
even
or it's
into
just
it.
a red herring, or so we also have like a bunch of fallacy referee pictures that we toss in. Like, it's so much easier to call people on their fallacies in this day and age than to actually present a good argument to get people's attention, because there are so many fallacies being thrown around.
Yep.
And if you can't be honest in your debate policy, then what's the point of even debating in the first place?
Exactly. Well, we're almost wrapping up for a bit, but if there's any final comments you'd like to make or anything that I've missed, feel free to throw it in there.
Do we have any like questions or anything? Sorry, we feel like we've really been rambling for a while.
No,
Mostly,
you've
we
been
feel
doing
bad about
great. Don't
that.
worry about it. I would say, like, if you had to say one core point of what you'd like to see people adopt in their politics, since we kind of got onto that point, what would it be?
Mutual needs of humanity. We live in a society wherein we absolutely make as much food and as much water and as much medicine as we need for our people. And since we've been on the street, it's become abundantly clear that the average politician would rather throw that food away, would rather throw that medicine away than give it to their fellow person. We need politicians and advocates and activists that understand that we are all people, that if we want to live in a human society, that means we have to move past our bigotry and things like that and go for the reality of real problems like food and water and electricity, which we can grant but refuse to for some reason. That, and we need to get rid of the speciest notion of that everybody must work. Because we spent 5 years plus looking for work and nobody would give it to us. And we are far happier and more well-moneyed doing no mainstream work at all. And society, shocker, has not fallen apart because we refuse to work at Five Guys Burgers and Fries.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You're always welcome back on the show. Thanks again to everybody who was watching or listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. If you haven't already, check out the Twitter as well as the socials linked in the description down below for both myself and for Philo. I also plan to have more discussions like this in the future. In fact, on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. CST, I am having Bob, a member of the Bad Praxis podcast, on my show to discuss all manner of issues that I will reveal in the future. Thanks again for watching and have a wonderful day.